a night watchman who had stumbled into a nightmare. Bumpy Johnson was awake. He was always awake at this hour. He sat in the study of his brownstone, a philosophy book open on his lap and a glass of lukewarm water on the table beside him. May was asleep upstairs, her breathing a soft rhythm that usually anchored him to the world of the living. But tonight, Bumpy felt a restlessness in his bones, a phantom itch, warning him that the wind was changing. He had survived decades in that life by listening to that itch. It was the instinct of a predator who senses danger long before it arrives. The phone rang, a harsh mechanical scream in the quiet house. Bumpy picked it up before the second ring. He didn't say hello. He never did. Talk, Bumpy said, his voice a low rumble of granite. Bumpy, the voice on the other end was breathless, tight with panic. It was Zip, his right hand, his shadow. Zip didn't panic. He was a man who could cut a throat while eating a sandwich. If Zip was panicked, the world had tilted off its axis. You need to come down to the river, under the bridge. The cops are already there, but I told them to wait. Who is it? Bumpy asked, standing as the book slid to the floor. Forgotten. Just come, Bumpy, Zip whispered. Please, just come. Bumpy hung up. He didn't wake May. He moved with the silent efficiency of a ghost, pulling on his trousers, shirt, and heavy wool coat. He checked his snub-nosed .38, slid it into the holster at his hip, and stepped into the cold mist. His driver was already waiting, the Cadillac idling, exhaust blooming white in the darkness. They drove in silence. Bumpy stared out the window at the passing streetlights, watching shadows stretch and retreat. He counted the blocks. He prepared his face. He locked away the husband, the philosopher, the chess player, and let the face of the king settle over his features, a mask of stone showing no fear, no pity, no weakness. When they reached the bridge, the scene was chaos, illuminated by the spinning red lights of 3 police cruisers. A crowd had gathered, held back by a line of uniformed officers. They whispered and pointed, their faces twisted with horror and curiosity. Bumpy stepped out of the car. The crowd parted not because of the police, but because Bumpy Johnson was walking. He moved through them like a shark through minnows. A police captain, a man Bumpy paid $500 a month to look the other way, stepped forward, pale and sweating despite the chill. Mr. Johnson, the captain said, raising a hand. You don't want to see this? Let us handle it. We'll get the coroner wagon down here. Clean it up. Move, Bumpy said. He didn't shout or threaten. He spoke a single word carrying the weight of a death sentence. The captain swallowed and stepped aside. I'm sorry, Bumpy. We found him 20 minutes ago. Bumpy crossed the police line and walked into the shadows beneath the steel girders. Zip stood there, hat in hand, staring at the ground. When he looked up, Bumpy saw tears in the hard man's eyes. Then Bumpy looked up. The body hung from a low beam, swaying slightly in the river breeze. The rope was thick hemp. The hands were tied behind the back. The face was a ruin, beaten, bruised, swollen beyond recognition. But Bumpy knew the clothes, the shoes, the slump of the shoulders. It was Elias. Elias was not a gangster, not a runner, a student at City College. He wore glasses. He talked about history and civil rights. He was Bumpy's favorite nephew, a boy he had taken under his wing, paying for his books and tuition, keeping him far from the business. Elias was the promise of what the Johnson family could be if they washed the blood from their hands. He was the future. Now he was meat hanging from a bridge. Bumpy didn't scream. He didn't fall to his knees. The air left his lungs in a slow, ragged hiss, but his face did not crack. He stepped closer and touched the boy's shoe. It was cold. Pinned to Elias's chest with a jagged knife was a piece of cardboard. Scrawled across it in crude black charcoal were the words, King of the Apes. It wasn't just a murder. It was a lynching, a hate crime, a message from men who didn't just want to kill Bumpy's family. They wanted to humiliate them, to remind Bumpy that no matter how much money he had, no matter how many suits he wore, to them he was just an animal. Cut him down, Bumpy whispered. The coroner needs to. The captain began. I said cut him down. Bumpy roared, the sound echoing off the concrete pillars like thunder. The officers flinched, hands drifting toward their batons. Zip pulled out a switchblade, climbed onto a crate, and sawed through the rope. Bumpy caught the body as it fell, the dead weight of the boy he had promised to protect. He held him for a moment, ignoring the blood soaking into his cashmere coat, then laid Elias gently on the dirty concrete. He pulled the knife from the chest and crushed the cardboard sign in his fist until his knuckles turned white. Who? Bumpy asked, staring at the battered face. We don't know yet, the captain said nervously, but word is a group from Hell's Kitchen were drinking at Oli's last night, making noise, talking about coming uptown to teach a lesson. White boys, hard cases. Hell's Kitchen, Bumpy repeated. The Irish mob, or freelancers, it didn't matter. They had crossed a line God himself wouldn't dare cross. We'll investigate, the captain said. We'll round up the usual. We'll get justice. Bumpy stood, wiping the blood from his hands with a handkerchief. He looked at the captain with eyes like black holes, empty of light. No, Bumpy said softly. You won't investigate. You'll write this up as a robbery gone wrong. You'll send the body to the funeral home, and then forget you ever saw this. Bumpy, you can't just if I see a uniform asking questions. Bumpy interrupted, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. If I see a detective knocking on doors, I will burn the 28th precinct to the ground with you inside it. Do you understand me? The captain nodded slowly. He understood. This wasn't police business anymore. This was war. Zip, Bumpy said, turning to his lieutenant. Get the car. Where are we going? Bumpy, Zip asked, wiping his eyes. Bumpy looked at the river. At the dark water churning against the pilings. We're going hunting. It brought no warmth. The news of Eliza's death spread through the neighborhood like a virus. The barbershops, the beauty salons, the stoops, everyone was whispering. They knew Elias. They knew he was a good boy. And they knew who his uncle was. The air in Harlem grew heavy with tension. A static charge waiting for the lightning strike. Bumpy didn't go home. He couldn't face May yet. He couldn't look her in the eye and tell her that the boy she loved like a son was dead because of his name. He had to balance the scales first. He had to bring her a blood offering. He went to the Blue Lounge and sat in the back room. The shades drawn, a bottle of whiskey on the table. He didn't drink. He just sat there, turning Ilias's class ring over and over in his fingers. He had taken it off the body at the morgue. It was gold with a blue stone. Zip entered the room. He had been out on the streets for 3 hours, shaking trees, breaking branches. He looked tired but grimly satisfied. I got a name, Zip said, closing the door. Bumpy stopped spinning the ring. Tell me. It's a crew called the M. Haven Boys. Zip said. 4 of them, led by a guy named Unstable Mick. They're usually Bronx-based, but they've been doing work for the Italians, trying to impress the Genovese family. They thought if they took out someone close to you, it would show they had guts. They were ready for the big time. Guts, Bumpy whispered. They grab a college kid and hang him from a bridge and call it guts. They're holed up in a warehouse over in the Navy Yard. Zip continued. An old textile storage place. My contact says they're still there, celebrating, drinking, thinking they're kings of the city. Bumpy stood. He put the ring in his pocket and buttoned his coat. How many men do we need? Zip asked. I can get 20 guys. We can storm the place. Shoot it up. No, Bumpy said. No guns. Zip frowned. Bumpy, they're armed. They're killers. I said no guns. Bumpy repeated. He walked to the wall where a set of heavy iron fireplace pokers hung, but he didn't take them. Instead, he went to the closet, opened it, and pulled out a length of heavy industrial steel chain, the kind used to secure cargo on trucks. It was cold, greasy, and heavy. Get the van, Bumpy said. The delivery van, no windows. You want to take them for a ride? Zip asked, a dark smile touching his lips. I want to take them to hell, Bumpy said, but first, I want to look them in the eye. They left the club, Bumpy, Zip, and 2 of their biggest enforcers, Tiny, a man the size of a vending machine, and K.O., who was quick with a knife. They piled into the back of a nondescript laundry van. The drive to the Navy Yard took 40 minutes. Bumpy spent the time sitting on a spare tire, staring at the floor. He was thinking about Elias, about the time he took the boy to his first Yankees game. Elias had caught a foul ball. He had been so happy. I failed you, Bumpy thought. I let the wolves in. The van stopped. The driver tapped on the partition. We're here. Side entrance. Light security. Bumpy kicked the back doors open. The warehouse was a towering brick structure, grim against the gray sky. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Zip picked the lock on the side door in 10 seconds. And they slipped inside. The warehouse smelled of dust and old cotton, a maze of crates and pallets. In the center, beneath a single hanging bulb, sat a table where 4 men played cards, passing a bottle of whiskey between them. Their laughter echoed through the vast space. The laughter of men without conscience. Bumpy motioned for Tiny and K.O. to flank them. He waited. He wanted to hear them. Did you see his face? One of the men laughed. He was big and red-faced, wearing a dirty undershirt. This was Mick, begging like a little girl. Please, my uncle. Please, Uncle Bumpy ain't going to do nothing. Another man sneered. He's washed up. An old man in a suit. We sent a message. Now we take the territory. King of the Apes. Mick chuckled, slapping down a card. Nice touch, Donnie. Bumpy stepped out of the shadows. He didn't run, he walked. His footsteps struck the concrete with heavy precision. Clack, clack, clack. The laughter died. The 4 men turned and saw a figure in a long black coat, a fedora shading his eyes, walking toward them with the inevitability of a funeral procession. Who the hell are you? Mick shouted, reaching for the pistol on the table. I'm the uncle. Bumpy said. Zip, Tiny, and K.O. surged forward from the darkness. It wasn't a fight, it was an avalanche. Tiny slammed into Donnie, driving him into a stack of crates with a bone-shattering crunch. K.O. kicked a chair from under another man, spinning him to the ground and planting a boot on his throat. Mick managed to grab his gun, but before he could raise it, Bumpy was there. He moved with a speed that defied his age. seizing Mick's wrist and twisting until the bone snapped with a wet pop. The gun clattered to the floor. Mick screamed and fell to his knees. Bumpy grabbed a fistful of Mick's hair and smashed his face into the card table. Cards and whiskey bottles scattered everywhere. He pulled Mick's head back. Blood streamed from his nose, but he was still conscious. "Look at me," Bumpy commanded. Mick looked. He saw death. "You like hanging, boys?" Bumpy asked softly. "You like ropes?" "Screw you," Mick spat, blood spraying onto Bumpy's coat. "You're dead, Johnson." "The Genovese family will." Bumpy slammed his face into the table again. Harder. Teeth cracked. "This isn't business," Bumpy said. "This is family, and you don't know the Genovese. They don't back failures, and they don't back child killers." Zip dragged the other two men into the center. All four were battered and bleeding but alive. Tiny held them down with ease. "What do we do with them?" Zip asked, breathing hard. "The river is right there." Concrete shoes. Bumpy studied the four men. Their bravado was gone. They realized they were in a room with a monster, and no police were coming. "Too easy," Bumpy said. "The river is quiet." Elias didn't get peace. He got terror. He got pain. He walked to the corner where he had dropped a heavy canvas bag and unzipped it. The clank of steel chains made the men flinch. "Get them up. Load them in the van." "Where are we going?" Donnie whimpered, clutching his broken ribs. Bumpy turned to him and smiled, a smile that would haunt Zip for years. "You boys like to travel. I hear you're from out of town. Time for a trip." They dragged the men outside, bound their hands with zip ties, and threw them into the back like sacks of garbage. Tiny sat with a baseball bat, daring any of them to move. Bumpy took the passenger seat. "Head for the rail yards," he told the driver. "The freight terminal on 12th Avenue." The drive was silent. The men in the back sobbed, whispering prayers and bargaining with God. But God wasn't listening. Bumpy Johnson was the only authority that mattered tonight. By the time they reached the rail yard, it was nearly midnight. Fog wrapped the steel tracks in a ghostly shroud. Boxcars, tankers, and flatbeds loomed like hulking shadows. Diesel engines rumbled, and the air smelled of ozone and burning oil, an industrial wasteland where things were crushed, moved, and forgotten. Bumpy ordered the van to stop near the main switching line. He stepped onto the gravel and listened to the deep rhythmic thrum of a massive locomotive idling on the outbound track, a long-haul freighter bound for Chicago. "Pulling 100 cars of coal and steel, bring them out." Zip and Tiny dragged the four men from the van. When they saw the trains, confusion crossed their terrified faces. They had expected a shallow grave, not a train yard. "What is this?" Mick stammered, cradling his broken wrist. "You going to run us over? Tie us to the tracks like a cartoon." Bumpy grabbed Mick by the collar and dragged him toward the front of the locomotive. The headlight was off, but heat radiated from the engine. "Run you over?" Bumpy shook his head. "No, that's too quick. 1 second, and it's lights out. You don't learn anything from that." He pointed to the heavy steel grate, the cowcatcher with iron handrails and coupling hooks above it. "Zip, get the chains." Zip brought them over. Bumpy looped one around Mick's waist, threaded it through the iron grate, and pulled tight. Mick screamed as the steel bit into his ribs. Bumpy padlocked it, then chained Donnie and the others beside him. All four were fastened to the front of the train, backs against hot metal, faces toward the empty track. "You're crazy," Donnie screamed, thrashing. "You can't do this. When this thing starts, the wind, the cold, the speed," Bumpy corrected. "Don't forget the speed. This is the Midnight Express. It doesn't stop until Chicago. 800 miles. 14 hours. The men began to wail. They wouldn't be crushed instantly, they would be battered, frozen, and terrified as the ground tore beneath them at 60 miles an hour. Bumpy stepped back and lit a cigar, the match flare illuminating his unyielding face. "You hung my boy in the air," he said over the idle engine. "You let him swing in the wind. You wanted to send a message. Well, you're the message now. Please," Mick begged. "We're sorry. We'll leave town. We'll do anything. Just don't let it move." "I got kids." Elias was a kid, Bumpy said. "He had a mother. He had a future. You took it." A whistle blew. Brakes hissed and released. The couplings clanged. "Oh God. Oh God." One man hyperventilated. Bumpy turned to walk away. Mick screamed, "How do we get off? When does it stop?" Bumpy glanced back. "It stops when the engineer decides. If you're lucky, he'll see you in Chicago. If you're not, it's a long ride." The train lurched forward, slow at first, metal grinding. The four men screamed in unison, scrambling for footing as their chains snapped tight. Bumpy watched as the train gathered speed. 5 miles an hour, 10. Their screams turned to curses, then desperate pleas. He didn't blink. Black smoke poured from the stack. Wind tore at their clothes. Their voices vanished beneath the engine's roar. The train passed him. He felt the rush of air, saw their faces one last time, masks of horror, mouths open and silent screams. They were chained to a dragon, and the dragon was waking. Bumpy watched the red taillights fade into the fog, the clack of wheels dissolving into distance until only silence and diesel remained. Zip stepped beside him, pale. Even for him, this was medieval. "Do you think they'll make it to Chicago?" Zip asked quietly. Bumpy exhaled a cloud of blue smoke. "I don't know, but for the next 14 hours, they'll have plenty of time to think about Elias." He turned toward the van. Let's go. I have to see May. We handled it. She going to be okay? Zip asked. No, Bumpy said. She'll never be okay. But at least she'll know the men who did it paid the price. As they drove back to Harlem, the knot in Bumpy's chest loosened slightly. The grief would remain forever, but the rage had been fed. He had balanced the scales. He had sent a message to every crew, every racist, every punk with a rope in the 5 boroughs. If you touch Bumpy Johnson's blood, you don't just die, you suffer. But the war wasn't over. The Mott Haven boys were only soldiers. Someone had pointed them toward Elias. Someone had sanctioned the hit. Bumpy wouldn't rest until he found the head of the snake. He arrived home as the sun rose. The house was quiet. May sat in the kitchen with a cup of cold tea, eyes red and swollen. She looked up and saw the blood on his coat, not his, but the blood of the men he had broken. She didn't ask where he had been. She knew. She walked over and placed her hands on his chest. Is it done? She whispered. It's done. Bumpy said. They caught a train. They won't be coming back. May nodded, resting her head against him as soft sobs shook her body. Bumpy held her and stared out the window, his eyes hard. He had chained the monsters to the train, but deep down he knew it was only the beginning. The tracks went on forever, and there were always more monsters waiting at the next station. But for tonight, the debt was paid with iron. The Midnight Express rattled into the Chicago rail yard at dawn. 3 hours late, after battling heavy loads and brutal winds, Engineer Miller pulled the brake lever, iron wheels screeching as the train ground to a halt. He climbed down, boots crunching on frosted gravel, thinking only of hot coffee and a warm bed. Walking toward the front for a routine inspection, he rounded the steel nose of the locomotive and stopped. His thermos slipped from his gloved hand and shattered. Steam curled around the engine like a shroud through the mist. He saw them no longer men, frozen monuments to agony. Bumpy slowly lifted his head and checked May. She was shaking, covered in glass dust, but unharmed. He stood and walked to the center aisle, looking at the casket. A single stray bullet had grazed the wood, leaving a jagged, splintered gouge in the mahogany. They had shot at a funeral, they had shot at the church, they had shot at Elias's body. Bumpy turned to face the congregation. His sunglasses were gone. His eyes burned with a fire that could consume the world. Everyone go home, Bumpy said. His voice was calm, but it carried to the back of the balcony. Go home and lock your doors. The service is over. He walked out of the church. Zip was waiting by the car, holding a shotgun, his face pale with rage. They shot up the church. Bumpy, Zip said. Vinnie Moretti. It had to be him. He missed, Bumpy said. He opened the trunk of the Cadillac and pulled out a leather bag that clinked with the sound of heavy metal. He missed me. He missed May, but he hit the casket. Bumpy closed the trunk. Get the boys, all of them. We're not going to Pleasant Avenue. We're going to send a message to the commission. I want a meeting tonight. With who? Zip asked. The 5 families won't sit with you right now. They think you're radioactive. Call Frank Costello, Bumpy said. Tell him I'm not asking for permission. Tell him I'm giving him a choice. Either he gives me Moretti, or I turn New York City into a graveyard. Tell him I'll start hitting their trucks, their casinos, their families. Tell him the Midnight Express is just a commuter train compared to what I'll do next. Zip nodded and ran to a payphone. Bumpy stood on the steps of the church, looking at the bullet holes in the stone. He touched one with his finger. It was still warm. You made a mistake, Vinnie, Bumpy whispered. You should have killed me. The meeting took place in neutral territory, a warehouse in the meatpacking district owned by the Teamsters. It was midnight, exactly 24 hours after the train had left the station. Frank Costello, the Prime Minister of the Underworld, sat at a folding table. He was a man of reason, a man who preferred bribes to bullets. He looked at Bumpy Johnson, who stood on the other side of the table, flanked by Zip and Tiny. Bumpy wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a leather coat and work boots. He looked like a man ready to pour concrete. You're making a lot of noise, Bumpy, Costello said, his voice raspy. Chaining men to trains, headlines, now shootouts at churches. This is bad for business. The mayor is breathing down my neck. Your boy, Moretti, shot at my wife, Bumpy said. He shot at a funeral. He killed a civilian kid to get a rise out of me. Moretti is a loose cannon, Costello admitted. But he's a made man. You know the rules. You can't touch a made man without permission. If you kill a capo, we have to go to war. It's the law. The law. Bumpy laughed. A harsh barking sound. Where was the law when my cousin was hanging from a bridge? Where was the law when my mother's house burned? Don't talk to me about rules. Frank, Moretti broke the rules. He made it personal. Bumpy leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. I'm going to kill him, Bumpy said. I'm telling you this out of respect. I'm going to kill him, and I'm going to kill anyone who stands next to him. If you protect him, I kill you. If the Genovese protect him, I burn their clubs. I have nothing to lose. Frank, my blood is already spilled. You want to save your empire. Step aside. Costello looked at Bumpy and saw the resolve. He knew Bumpy wasn't bluffing. Bumpy Johnson controlled Harlem. If he went to war, the heroin trade would stop. The numbers racket would stop. The city would bleed money. And Vinnie Moretti wasn't worth the loss in profits. Moretti was a thug, a liability who brought unnecessary heat. Costello lit a cigarette and took a long drag. Vinnie is at a construction site tonight, Costello said softly. The new high-rise on 34th Street. He's supervising a concrete pour. He likes to watch the cement set. Says it relaxes him. Bumpy didn't smile. He just nodded. His guards, Bumpy asked. They might get thirsty around 2 a.m. They might take a break. Thank you, Frank, Bumpy said. Bumpy, Costello said as he turned to leave. Make it clean. No more trains. No more headlines. Make him disappear. He won't disappear, Bumpy said. He'll just become part of the foundation. Bumpy and his crew arrived at the construction site at 2:15 a.m. The skeleton of the skyscraper rose into the night sky, a grid of steel beams and shadows. Work lights cast long, eerie shapes across the mud and machinery. There were 2 guards at the gate. They were gone. Costello had kept his word. Bumpy signaled Zip and Tiny to stay back. He's mine, Bumpy said. He walked into the site alone, carrying a heavy iron pipe. He moved through the maze of rebar and wooden forms. In the center of the site, a large cement mixer churned, its rhythmic whoosh masking the sound of his footsteps. Standing near the edge of a deep foundation pit was Vinnie Moretti. He wore a hard hat and an expensive camel hair coat, smoking a cigar and looking down into the wet concrete, lost in thought. Bumpy stopped 10 feet behind him. Vinnie, Bumpy said. Moretti spun around and reached for the gun in his shoulder holster, but he was slow, and arrogant. Bumpy swung the iron pipe. It connected with Moretti's forearm with a sickening crack. The gun flew into the wet cement. Moretti howled, clutching his broken arm. Johnson, he screamed, stumbling back. You're dead. You hear me? You can't touch me. I'm a capo. Bumpy stepped closer. You're not a capo tonight, Vinnie. Tonight, you're just the guy who shot at my wife. Moretti scrambled backward, his heels catching on the edge of the wooden form. He fell into the mud and looked up at Bumpy, his eyes wide with terror. Wait, Moretti pleaded. We can work this out. I'll give you the numbers. I'll give you the territory. I'll pay you. You can't pay for Elias, Bumpy said. You can't pay for the fear in my wife's eyes. Bumpy dropped the pipe. He didn't need it. He grabbed Moretti by the lapels of his expensive coat. Moretti tried to fight, clawing at Bumpy's face, but he was powerless against the strength of a man fueled by pure vengeance. Bumpy dragged him to the edge of the pit. Below them, 10 feet down, was a fresh pour of concrete, deep, wet, and heavy. You like construction, Vinnie? Bumpy asked. You like building things? Well, you're going to help build this city. No, please, Bumpy, Moretti screamed. Frank won't let you get away with this. Frank gave me the address, Bumpy whispered. The hope died in Moretti's eyes. He realized he had been sold out. He was alone. Bumpy shoved him. Moretti fell, landing in the center of the wet concrete with a heavy splat. He sank immediately to his waist. The slurry was thick, almost quicksand-like. He struggled, thrashing his arms, but the more he moved, the deeper he sank. Help! Moretti screamed, his voice echoing off the steel beams. Pull me out. Bumpy stood on the edge, looking down. He picked up a shovel leaning against a pile of sand. You sent boys to kill a student, Bumpy said. You hung him from a bridge. You thought you were untouchable. I'm sorry. Moretti wept, the concrete now up to his chest. The pressure was crushing his lungs. I'm sorry. Apology accepted, Bumpy said. He threw the shovel into the pit. It landed next to Moretti. Bumpy turned to the control panel of the cement chute above the pit and pulled the lever. A fresh avalanche of wet gray concrete poured down from the hopper, cascading over Vinnie Moretti, burying his screams, burying his ambition, burying the hate. Bumpy watched until the pit was level. He watched until the surface was smooth and gray. There was no sign of Vinnie Moretti, just a fresh foundation for a new building. Rest in peace. Vinnie, Bumpy said, you're finally supporting the community. He turned and walked away. The only sound was the churning mixer and the distant siren of a police car that would never find the body. The next morning, Harlem was quiet. The tension that had gripped the neighborhood for 3 days had broken. The word was out. Vinnie Moretti had vanished. The Italians had gone silent. The M. Haven boys were gone. Bumpy Johnson had cleaned house. He sat on the front stoop of his brownstone, watching the sun come up. He was tired. His bones ached. He felt every year of his life weighing on his shoulders. Violence had a cost. It took pieces of your soul that you never got back. The door opened behind him. May walked out holding 2 cups of coffee. She sat beside him on the cold stone step and handed him a cup. He took it, his scarred hands wrapping around the warmth. Is it over? May asked. She didn't look at him. She looked at the street where children were starting to walk to school. For now, Bumpy said, Moretti is gone. Costello won't move against us. We have peace. And Elias? May asked, softly. Bumpy reached into his pocket and pulled out the gold-class ring with the blue stone. He handed it to her. He's at rest. The men who hurt him, they've been judged. May took the ring and held it to her chest. A single tear rolled down her cheek. but she nodded. She leaned her head on Bumpy's shoulder. "You're a hard man, Ellsworth Johnson," she whispered. "I have to be," Bumpy said, putting his arm around her. "Because the world is hard, and I promised I'd keep you safe." "You did," she said. "But promises are heavy." "I can carry them," Bumpy said. They sat in silence as the city woke around them. The king and queen of Harlem. They had won the war, but the scars would remain. Bumpy looked at his hands. He thought of the train. He thought of the concrete. He knew he was a monster to the world, but as he looked at May, safe and alive beside him, he knew he could live with being a monster as long as he was her monster. A car drove by slowly. The driver,